We're getting older. Life expectancy is up to 78 in the US. If you make it to 20, it's up to in the mid-80s. And oh, by the way, we're going to work longer. I don't think it was by choice, but in 1996, only 11% of workers that were 65 said they were going to keep working. Now it's 36%. So we're going to stay in the workforce. And today, a quarter of those workers in the middle class say they're planning on their retirement age being 80. So you're going to have workplaces that are very different because we're going to have a bunch of young people and we're going to have a bunch of old people like us, like me, not y'all, but me. And you're going to end up with some very interesting workplace dynamics. All of this driven in an economy where the talent bar is the issue. So let's see if we can get the groom to agree on one thing before we start. The bar for acceptable levels of skills in the workplace has risen. Yes? Anybody think it's going to go back down? The bar keeps rising. We used to have this pyramid of creative work with all this routine stuff underneath. But part of that routine work was outsourced overseas, and part of that routine work machines started doing. And so today we have this much more diamond-shaped work environment. This is something Council on Competitiveness did. This is for service workers. Since 1960s, the routine manual work and the routine cognitive work continues to drop. The complex communication work and the expert thinking continues to go up, and this is for service workers. What we expect of people continues to rise. If you look at Kentucky, several people talked about this yesterday, and they're going to talk a lot about it this afternoon, so I'm going to skip a couple slides through. But Kentucky does not have one of the highest attainment rates. We finished doing a Southern Growth Conference a couple weeks ago, and we haven't done a report. We'll do one in September on Future of the South report. But this idea of figuring out how to quantify credentials is going to become an issue for the South. How do we know what someone who has some of this, degrees, how do we know what they're worth? As employers, you actually test people more than any time in history to find out what does it mean to have these kind of things. We know the more education and skills you get, the more you're going to make. This is a straight from less than high school up to graduate degree, annual earnings. The bar's straight up. The more talent you have in terms of collecting skills, the more you're going to earn. It's not a one-on-one. This is a chart from Nicole Smith, who's doing a lot of great work at Georgetown University. What we find is that for the little red line is what a BA will make in a lifetime, which is about $2.9 million. Only 7% of people with less than a high school will make more than that. But as you move up, 28% of people with an associate's degree will make more than people with a BA. If you have a degree today in associates in electrical engineering or plumbing or welding or something, welding salaries today go somewhere in the $80,000 to $100,000 range. BAs in sociology, not as much. So as we think about what we want in the future, we should be thinking about what does the workforce need? And in 1973, for associate's degrees and higher, we needed 28% of our workforce to be there. Today, for associate's degree or higher, we need a little over half of our workforce to be there. Now, we only need 33% of the workforce in America to have a BA. So if you want to be controversial and you want to poke at me during the breaks coming up, why do 94% of parents say they want their kids to get a 4-year college degree, and 70% of high school seniors go to college, when only 33% of the jobs require it? Now, a whole bunch of the jobs require something past high school, those middle skills, but we don't know what that means yet. That's a real public policy issue, is we don't understand middle skills yet. We don't understand what it means to have more than high school. We know you need more, but the whole concept of do you need a BA and what field and all that, we'll get a lot of public policy discussions over the years. Attainment rates by southern states, you guys are sort of at the norm, which is not as high as you need to be. You're at 30% have a degree of some type in Kentucky. Maryland is the highest here at 45, Virginia at 44, but a lot of states in the higher 30s. The projections are that by 2020, you need 56% for the jobs you were projected to have, 56% of your workers need to have some type of degree. That's a big gap between now and then, and I know your degree program, you're working on getting more degrees, and I heard the mayors talk about that yesterday. You're going to have to get higher credentials in order to be competitive, or what will happen, and everybody who's worked an economic development project in this room understands it, is you won't get the jobs. If you don't have the labor, you're not going to get the jobs. This is the current degree attainment rates by type, by ethnic type. 43% of whites have a degree in America, 59% of Asians, only 27% of blacks, and 19% of Hispanics. How do you stack up? Your African American rates are slightly less and Hispanic rates slightly less. Your Asian rates are slightly higher, as are your Native American. Your big gap is what you're doing with your white citizens. 43% of white citizens in America have a degree of some sort, and only 30% in Kentucky. And messy chart, and I'm going to explain it to you. This is a chart showing what you're doing with your high school graduation rates. If this is Kentucky pulled out, and this is the national average, you're actually above the national average for Hispanics and African Americans, and right at the national average for high school graduation for all citizens, but you're lower among white citizens. There's a wide gap here that you need to start filling. And then, of course, the economy's shifted fairly dramatically. This is the shift since World War II. We'd have many fewer people doing agriculture, many fewer doing transport, less than half doing manufacturing, a lot more doing finance and insurance, a lot more doing health and education. Government's actually fairly close to the same. We've shifted dramatically what it is to have an economy in America. And what's happening recently should give us all a little pause. This is productivity gains since the 1990s by sector. This is annual by sector. Information technology has been growing almost 8% productivity a year. Wholesale trade, manufacturing, finance, all of these on this side have been huge productivity gains. The three over here are state and local government, healthcare, and education. So where have our jobs been coming from over the last 20 years in most of our communities? Those three sectors, which are the sectors that have not had the productivity gains, which would tell you at some point that job growth in those sectors is going to slow down dramatically. That makes sense to people? That's worrisome. As we look at where we're going to grow in the future, there's a couple other worrisome things. The first is we lost a lot of wealth we thought we had. We lost $7 trillion of homeowner equity that we thought we had. Remember the bubble? So back in 01, we were sitting here, we got really dumb, fat, and happy somewhere in the middle, and now that equity has been lost. Unfortunately, we borrowed against a bunch of it, so we've created long cliffs. Net worth in America in 2005, overall net worth was $100,000 per person, 66 now. And if you take your home out, the average net worth in 2010 of people in America is $15,000. Very, very limited reserves. And if you look at the racial gap this is including housing, whites have 110,000 average wealth. African Americans have 5,000 average wealth. Big differences in our communities. And then the third problematic thing is that household incomes have been declining now for about a decade. So this is real household income down from about 53.1 to 49.4. Here's what happens when you put all this together, and if I knew you better as an audience, I'd have put my math sucks thing. If I'd been Ted the teddy bear from the movie, I'd actually put that up. But if you're growing slower, and you have less money, and you have less wealth, and oh, by the way, good news, we're saving instead of nothing 5%, then the math is we've taken all the money out of the economy. You're not growing new money. You've taken money you thought you had away, and you're sticking some of it in your mattress. So that when I told you before, there's nothing that tells us we're going to grow faster sooner, that's what I meant. There's nothing, if we could get a massive U.S. commitment to cutting costs in some sector or exporting more, you could turn this up. But otherwise, there's not much else you're going to do in order to free those markets up. This is the household debt. I forgot to put the chart in there. We were at 14% of debt ratio. We're now down to 11. So we're helping our balance sheets. This is what corporate balance sheets look like. Family balance sheets have gotten there. But we've done so by not spending. And we don't spend in an economy that's 2/3 consumption, you get the fallout. Good news for Kentucky, you're not in this massive southern thing. This is upward mobility of people. Most of the South is the worst place in America to try to get from being low to middle or high income. Kentucky's actually in the middle of this group. So a good thing for you guys. Competition continues to rise. I'm not going to go through this morning, but we know what it is that drives corporate decisions. It's some combination of the cost of doing business and the labor, the regulation, the markets, and the infrastructure. It's not one thing. You know, when we talk about these things, and sometimes we'll get up here and say, well, highway accessibility is really important. It really is. But everything up here is over 80% rated as really important. The list is a couple hundred things long. There are a lot of things we have to do well in order to compete. When we're talking about quality of life factors, it's crime rates, healthcare facilities, housing costs, and public schools. Those are the top four. They've been the top four on the chart since 1986 when it started. When you ask global manufacturers what decides where they move, the number one thing is talent. When you ask corporate headquarters why they move, the number one thing is talent. When you ask data centers where they move, labor cost and availability, it's talent. It's all about people. You're going to spend your whole afternoon today talking about people. And then finally, communities have to be resilient, because I agree 100% with what they were saying yesterday with the Brookings Institute, that people aren't going to wait for the federal government to solve their problem or the state government to solve their problems. They're going to have to do it themselves. We did a report a couple years ago called The Road to Recovery is Named Main Street, because everywhere we went, people were coming up with different ideas and not depending on other people. You guys are leaders, and that's sort of odd in America. We don't actually like leaders. We're cowboys. We don't want to be told what to do. But two things. We want someone to make sense of all this stuff. I've been throwing a lot of it at you this morning. We want someone to make sense of it. So all you Leadership Kentucky people expect you to be the most educated. I don't mean having the most credentials, but to be up to speed. And then two, and this is the compact that we've got broken right now in Washington and most capitals, we want someone to take action about all that stuff that solves our problems or makes our lives better. We actually don't want leaders to sit around and talk about it. We want them to do something. And that's every test that's been done on leadership says that's what we want. Jack Welch says that good leaders create a vision, articulate a vision, passionately own the vision, and relentlessly drive it to completion. What's your vision in Kentucky? Where are you headed? What's your vision in your hometown? If you're from Berea, what do you want? The goal for communities is to take that mound of paper, move it to some not dartboard where you try everything, but move it to a scorecard where you can figure out what you want to do. You've got to know where you are and what you're going to be, where you want to be. You also have to know what the customer wants. That's known as the reality check, because you can't always have everything you want when you're dependent on others. You've got to make choices. Leadership is about making choices. And that's our politics today. We tend to argue the facts. We don't ever get to the point of arguing the choices. And we have choices to be made. We have to know what our capacity to act is. And finally, we have to know what all these impacts of change are going to do to us to make sure that we can get what we want to do. And in this complex, scarce world, you need a few friends. And I think that having something as strong as the Kentucky Chamber working with you starts that, because collaboration is the act of working with one or more people to produce something special. And it's not, people like this one. Collaboration is an unnatural act between unconsenting adults. You actually have to work together. It's not the royal wedding. You don't have to love each other. You don't have to stay married forever. Maybe a bad example, but you don't have to stay married forever. It's about building a habitat house. You create a plan that you can follow, and you do your part, and you have the other people do their part, and you trust each other to get that done. You can do nothing and see what happens. Some people are choosing to do that. You can do something individually and see what kind of individual impact you have. You can do something together, different groups, and have a coordinated impact. You can do lots of the same things together with a plan, which is normally what a chamber does in a local community. There are also disruptive impacts. Every one of you knows something you've tried to get done, or somebody's tried to get done and someone's got in the way or stopped you completely from doing it. But the goal is to align what you're trying to do to have collective impact. So if you're trying to improve principles, you're trying to have collective impact for that. You're trying to make sure that you raise all of the principles in the state of Kentucky to a higher level. As you go out to your break in a little while, if you see me, I want you to tell me one thing. I want you to tell me about your place. You're a leader. You're supposed to tell a story. And human beings reason by stories. So if you had to tell me about Kentucky, what would you tell me? If you had to tell me about Lexington or Richmond or Bowling Green, what would you tell me? What's your story? Your citizens listen to leaders to hear those stories, and I think that's the key for you. Finally, if you're going forward, if you're going to be successful, here are your characteristics. You're going to have strong leadership, and your citizens are going to be involved in what you do. You're going to have to learn to act quickly because change happens quickly. You're going to have to work well with others and have strong partnerships, and that you can see what happens when we don't work well with each other. You're going to have to quantify credentialed talent. If you want, I tell communities, if you want a quick, get ahead of everybody else, it's how you do your training. We're not very good at it in the world. How do we help people get trained for new stuff faster? How do you have the capacity to do things? By the way, you need to be good at something. And above all, you need to be intentional in your actions. You need to decide to do things that make you intentional. If you want to follow some of the work that's being done by Southern Growth, it's southern.org. We have Twitter feeds and associate members. We've also been publishing over the last, I think it's 17 weeks now, commentaries by Southern leaders on where we've been and where we're headed. I think there are 40 or so of them so far. We'll continue to publish through the summer and then create an ebook on them. But what are leaders from the past and current thinking about the South? I wanted to end with a quote. I wrote this one on a piece of paper today. It's an old quote. It's not a new quote, so I'm not picking on anyone. The strain of anti-intellectualism has been a constant threat winding its way through our politics and cultural life, nurtured by the false notion that democracy means that my ignorance is as great as your knowledge. And that's Isaac Asimov a long time ago. But this whole idea that you as leaders get a pass for trying to know the facts or working hard to understand it is part of the problem we have. Think about how you get your information. And if you listen to only one station, listen to 2. If you read only one newspaper, read 4. If you follow only one Twitter feed or 10 Twitter feeds, follow 20. Try to understand, in the end, we have different values, so we'll make different choices. But you've got to get broader information if you're going to make good choices, because the world's changing too fast for you not to. Thank you very much.
Ted, what a terrific presentation. We all are exposed to a lot of information, a lot of PowerPoints, a lot of seminars that you packed it in there, as well as I think I've seen or online or in person. It was a great
I like
piece
your
of
shoes
information.
too. So
oh, thanks. Thanks.
You got to be cool to wear Bucks,
We're close to the break, but I think it's important enough that if you're like me, he stimulated you enough that there might be a couple of questions out there. And if you will, please make your way to the mic very quickly, and let's challenge him on a couple of these things. I thought a lot of that was really interesting. And as you make your way to the mic, we'll we'll just bleed over just a little bit, and we'll adjust our time. The aerobics and yoga session will start on time, we promise. So let's have our first question.
Thanks. You talk about the talent pool and citing jobs. I wondered if you do any research into one of the problems that's big in Kentucky and the rest of the South is pills, prescription pills, drug abuse, if that's part of the factor in not only education, but getting a workforce that's viable.
Yeah, no, if you go to any business group, what you're going to hear is we can't find qualified employees. I mean, it's the first thing you hear from everybody. And I do some work in upstate South Carolina. BMW has 400 jobs they can't fill. There's a lot of reasons that you can't fill jobs. I mean, qualifications is one, but hurdles are another. And some of those are the old model hurdles with transportation issues or childcare issue or whatever. But yes, the answer is we're seeing more of that. There are some people here know more about this than I do, but more of the newer drugs that are cheaper stay in the system longer. So people are not passing screens for a lot longer period of time. So yes, it's a major problem. What do you want to do about it? I mean, what are we going to do if there are 1 million people who can't pass a drug screen? For me, that's the question, is how to, and I'm not on either side of this, you know. I tend to be somewhere in the middle of a lot of these discussions. I don't want to send them all to jail, and I don't want to send them all to rehab, but I do want to fix it, because I also don't want to support them all. So we've got to find some way of combining law enforcement, treatment, whatever those screens are that stop people from doing that. Gainful employment might actually be helpful in some ways, and whether that's structured employment at a company or unstructured. But yes, it's a major problem. It is. There's a lot of new research coming out. You're going to hear some today, I'm sure, so I don't want to take anybody's thunder, about whether or not businesses, because there's a huge number of people looking for work, have set a bar too high to find those people. You know, people say, we can't find anybody who has the skills. And then you look at the skill sets they can't find, you know, and they blame the schools. They say, well, the schools aren't producing. And then they look at the skill sets and they say, well, they're not punctual, and they don't have a good work ethic, and they don't have and you start going, well, wait a minute, where's reading and communication and math? And you find that's lower. So there's a whole bunch of things, and certainly that's going to be part of anything. We've got to have a culture there. What we're doing so far hasn't worked. What we did with cigarettes worked some. I mean, we've cut the percent of people smoking cigarettes by a lot. There are ways to change people's behaviors. We aren't real serious about this one so far. Other questions?
Another question or comment? Let me just finish up and ask Ted. One of the things that you stated was who's competitive in the workplace and who's not, one of your statements. I want to add Kentucky in there. Some of the stats that you use show a pretty bright picture. Some of the stats show that we've got a long way to go.
True of almost every state, by the way. But
the
yes.
question is Kentucky today competitive in the workplace with jobs and economy? Why or why not? And what do we need to do in a very short answer to get there?
Let's do two things. You're from all over the state, so how many of you think your local regions, wherever you're from, are very competitive to attract new businesses with the jobs of tomorrow? Raise your hand if you think you're very competitive. Now raise your hands if you think you're not very competitive. So the answer would be from Kentuckians that you think you have a problem. So the issue, I would presume, is talent. So how many of you who raised your hand that you weren't competitive, it's about people? Yeah, most of the room. If it's about infrastructure, it's costly but fixable. If it's about the cost of doing business or the business climate, then Dave, that's, get quick, By the way, it's always a balance between the stuff you have, the quality of your place and the cost of your place. There are lots of places that show up on these maps that have better talent but are losing jobs to places that have lower cost of doing business or better regulatory requirements. So environment. So it's a combination. So it's never one or the other. You don't have to be the best at everything, but you have to be able to compete in the middle. Kentucky's done pretty well. You said yesterday, small state, relatively low growth. You weren't a place where everybody ran from the Northeast too. You might be too far north for that. I mean, they ran further south, but they're not running anymore. Now businesses are trying to figure out where they can make profit. Where's the return on investment? And Kentucky's position, I think, is pretty good there, but you've got to have a culture in the state that says, we're going to have to be lifelong learners. We're going to have to collect skills our whole life. And so this whole idea, we used to have, career ladders. Remember career ladders? Well, now we have skill lattices. You've got to pick up new skills all the time. You've done this in your television world. There are probably things you have to do today that you didn't have to do a year ago or 2 years ago. It's true of everybody in this room. So you have to understand that no matter what you have, 10 years from now, you need something else. And how do you do that, and how do you deliver it? I think the interesting question is going to be the change in the delivery system. Whether our higher education, our public schools, or our private schools, charter schools, however we're going to deliver, what is that delivery system going to be, and how are we going to receive it as young Generation Z people? Because it's changing. And as Kentucky, you have one of the great advantages of being relatively small is it makes you nimble. You can turn Kentucky on some things that really big states can't do. And so if I were you, I'd spend a lot of time figuring out how to focus on the exports, focus on the talent, make sure that I had the best business regulatory environment and cost structure that I possibly could have. But I would make sure that the business community of Kentucky was globally focused and people focused. And that's the way I'd try to win.